Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar where we are treating the Danish sentence test. The Danish sentence test, also called DAST, is a speech and noise intelligibility test for measurement, fitting and clinical research in hearing aids and hearing assessment. So today we're taking a deep dive into the purpose, the recordings and some audio examples, the use and the supporting software of this hearing assessment tool. My name is Jeppe Lindegaard. I'm head of branding strategy and events here at Danish Sound Cluster, where we aim to unite sound people, ignite collaboration and curate inspiration across audio, acoustics and the hearing industry. So today I would like to welcome Abigail Kressner, Associate Professor at Copenhagen Hearing and Balance Center at Rigshospitalet. Welcome to you, Abigail.
Thank you.
And I would like to welcome Pernilla Kjær Andersen, who's PhD student at the Copenhagen Hearing and Balance Center at Rigshospitalet and in the Hearing Systems section at DTU Health Tech. Welcome to you, Pernilla.
Thank you very much.
And next, Anja Kofoed Pedersen, lead audiologist at WS Audiology. Welcome to you, Anja.
Thank you.
And Lars Bramsløw, you can turn on your video as well so we can see your face. PhD and principal scientist at Eriksholm Research Center, which is part of Oticon. I will try and start Lars's video here. There we go.
Here we go.
And
thank you, Jeppe.
you're welcome. And lastly, Brian K. Mann, you're a researcher at Oticon. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Great. So good to see all of you. We are a big crowd today in the panel, so should be lots of fun today. Now there's nothing else to do but to leave the word to you, Abigail, who will take us through some of the purpose and give us an overview of this Danish sentence test. So sit back and enjoy the show, everybody, and take it away, Abigail.
Great. So, good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Abby Kressner, and today, as Jeppe said, I will introduce the Danish sentence test, why it was developed, how it was created, and how it's being used. I'm very happy to have a diverse audience from research, audiology, and industry, and I hope this will be of interest across all three of these perspectives. Speech understanding and noise is one of the central outcome measures in hearing research and audiology. For most people with hearing loss, the main difficulty is not necessarily audibility, but understanding speech when background noise is present. For example, in everyday social environments, at a dinner table, or in meetings. This makes speech and noise perception a key metric in both clinical audiology and hearing research. It's also critically important for the hearing device industry, where improving speech understanding in complex sound environments remains one of the main technological challenges. In Denmark, this is particularly relevant as the Danish hearing aid industry has a major international impact. Moreover, there's a long tradition of close collaboration between research, clinics, and industry here in Denmark. So taken together, these place high demands on the quality of the speech materials we use for evaluation and comparison. Ideally, a speech and noise test should be sensitive so it can detect meaningful differences between listeners, devices, and conditions. It should be efficient so it fits into both research protocols and clinical workflows. It must be reliable, giving stable results across sessions and test sites, and it should be ecological, reflecting the type of speech and listening situations people actually encounter in daily life. These requirements motivate the development of the Danish sentence test. Denmark already has several well-established speech tests, such as Den Tale 1 and Den Tale 2, HINT, and so on. These tests have been available and widely used for decades. At the same time, many of these materials were developed with earlier research questions and testing paradigms in mind. Today, we often want larger corpora, more variability, more scoring units, and increasingly materials that support audiovisual testing and modern, more computationally oriented approaches. This creates a need not necessarily to replace existing tests, but to complement them with a resource that is flexible, more extensive, and openly available. The Danish sentence test project followed four main steps: creation of the text material, recording of the speech, equalization of difficulty and level, and finally validation. These first two elements have primarily to do with the creation of a new corpus, and the latter steps have to do with speech and noise tests. So I'll briefly walk through each of these steps, starting with the creation phase. The DAST corpus was created using a hybrid approach that combines linguistic variation with lexical consistency. On the one hand, we wanted the kind of linguistic diversity found in well-known English language corpora, such as TIMID, IEEE, and BKB, where the sentence is very natural in structure and content. And on the other hand, we wanted the strong control offered, for example, by matrix sentence tests, where lexical balance and comparability across lists are central. DAST was designed to occupy the middle ground between these two trade-offs. So to achieve this, we used what we like to call a template-based approach. Each sentence follows a predefined syntactic template, which I show here on the right. This allows us to control the sentence structure while still generating linguistically varied and natural-sounding Danish. Importantly, each sentence contains 3 predefined keywords, which can be used for scoring in a test. These keywords are content words, so typically nouns, verbs, or adjectives. And these lexical words were drawn from most frequent Danish words. These frequencies were based on written Danish frequency list, as comprehensive frequency lists for spoken Danish were not available. While this is not necessarily optimal, it allowed us to ensure that the lexical items were familiar and representative. Function words and additional elements were then added as needed to ensure grammatical correctness and natural flow. Overall, the goal was to balance variability and consistency while producing a large corpus of sentences. We used this method to create 1,200 unique sentences. Now we jump into the recording phase. The corpus was recorded in collaboration with Mediehuset Copenhagen, where here you can see a peek into our recording setup. And we worked with multiple speakers, namely 2 female and 2 male talkers. Each of these speakers recorded all 1,200 sentences. In addition to these sentences, each speaker also recorded extended monologues of at least 30 minutes. These include spontaneous, unscripted stories, as well as reading from a chapter in a book. This provides a rich resource, not only for sentence testing, but also for other applications such as training, audiovisual testing, or AI-oriented research. We worked with multiple, sorry, this is wrong. There. Here, I'll play a couple sample sentences. The first is a sample from female 1.
Der mange drenge, der deltager i konkurrencer.
And the second from our first male talker.
Der mange drenge, der deltager i konkurrencer.
And I'll also give a quick preview of the audiovisual version of the material. So these are the faces of our 4 talkers. I'll play the top left video from female 1 now.
Der mange drenge, der deltager i konkurrencer.
Right, so in a later extension of the corpus, we invited a subset of the original speakers back about 1 year later for an additional recording session. This time, the speakers recorded spontaneous dialogues. The goal was to capture more natural conversational speech and elements like realistic vocal effort, which are not present in, or were not present in the existing isolated sentences. So by using the same speakers, we maintained speaker consistency while adding a more ecological and conversational speech component to the DAST corpus. This expansion of the corpus includes approximately 3 hours of dialogue material. Each sentence is roughly 4 seconds long, so that brings approximately the total amount of material up to around 10 hours. That's just a guess. I haven't calculated it. You will hear more about these dialogues from Pernilla later in the webinar. After creation and recording, the material underwent extensive linguistic and quality characterization. On the linguistic side, we assessed properties such as unnatural wording or uncomfortable semantic content. And on the recording side, we evaluated sound quality, pronunciation, and for the audiovisual material, video quality. This step is crucial as large corpora are only useful if both the language and the recordings are consistently of high quality. So any semantic issues or naturalness issues here would directly affect test reliability and potentially validity. Just to give you a brief idea of the results from the linguistic evaluations, I'm showing some of the analysis here. This figure shows naturalness and discomfort ratings obtained from an online survey with more than 800 participants. Listeners were asked to judge individual sentences from the DAST corpus based on how natural they sound, so that's the top plot, and whether they contained any uncomfortable or unpleasant semantic content, that's the bottom plot. Let me briefly walk you through just the top plot. On the x-axis, we have the sentence number for the DAST sentences and for extra filler sentences that we added over on the right. On the y-axis, we have the naturalness rating, where higher values indicate greater naturalness. So each point in the plot represents the mean score given to each sentence. The overall pattern shows that the vast majority of the Danish sentence cluster in the region of high naturalness, which is exactly what we were aiming. Sentences that fell outside this region were flagged and either revised or excluded from later stages. So this step ensured that sentences with unnatural constructions or unintended connotations did not carry over into any final test materials. So together, these results give us confidence that the written material is both linguistically natural and semantically appropriate for speech and noise testing. I'll give you a brief preview of the quality evaluation as well here. So this figure on the left summarizes the number of sentences that were rejected for use in speech and noise testing based on either the sound quality, pronunciation, or video quality. The colors are used to indicate the individual speakers. So you can see here that female 1, represented by the dark blue color, had the fewest rejected sentences. In these plots on the right, the same information is replotted to show the number of sentences per speaker that are approved for either acoustic speech and noise testing, that's the middle plot, or audiovisual speech and noise testing, that's the plot on the right. Again, recordings that did not meet the relevant criteria were flagged and excluded later on. I'll just briefly note that all of these characterization data are published open source in a CSV file together with the corpus material. So this was done both for transparency, but also so that the linguistic and quality ratings can be reused or built upon in future applications or extensions of the material. I've been through some details of the corpus creation, so now we'll focus on the test development, the latter half. To support practical use of the materials, we have also developed a dedicated software application. This app allows flexible test construction, presentation, and scoring, and it supports both research and applied use. It's openly available, which aligns with the goals of transparency and reproducibility. First, here you can see the test setup interface, where in the quick start pane here, users can select, for example, the corpus, target, masker, etc., and divide parameters such as test mode and the starting SNR level. In the advanced pane, users can upload a CSV file that specifies exactly which lists or sentences a participant should hear and in which order. There's also an extra interface for specifying all kinds of settings, such as whether the software should use an adaptive paradigm, whether scoring should include all words or just keywords, how the noise and the stimuli should be played, using which playback methods, and which channels, for example, should the stimuli should be routed to. Once the test is running, the software handles stimulus presentation and scoring. So, for example, non-scored words are automatically disabled if relevant. Finally, the software provides progress updates, making it straightforward to follow the performance along the way. On the left, you can see the presented SNR is a function of the number of presented sentences in the current block. In this way, you can easily track the progress through, for example, an adaptive track procedure for estimating a speech reception threshold. On the right, the score for each of the presented sentences is plotted in scatterplot form, and a psychometric function is fitted and overlaid on top. Results are automatically saved along the way for further analysis. And overall, the goal of the software is to make the DAST materials easy to deploy, while still supporting the flexibility and control needed in both research and implied settings. So a key step in developing DAST is psychometric characterization. So understanding how the sentences behave as a test. In our first investigation to explore this, we estimated psychometric functions for each of the 1,200 sentences from female 1. To do so, we used a method of constant stimuli, the details of which are not super important here, but it included speech and noise testing with 60 normal hearing listeners. On the x-axis of this top plot, we have signal-to-noise ratio in decibels, and on the y-axis, we have percent correct keyword recognition. Each curve in light gray represents performance across an individual sentence, whereas the black curve shows the mean psychometric function. With the dashed lines, the inflection point of the mean curve is highlighted, and the SNR at this inflection point represents the speech reception threshold, or SRT. The slope of the curve at the SRT indicates roughly how sensitive the test is to changes in SNR. The distribution of the inflection points and slopes across sentences are shown in the two bottom plots, respectively. This sentence-specific data can and should be used to normalize the intelligibility of each sentence. So here we visualize how adjusting the RMS of each sentence by an amount equivalent to the difference between the individual inflection point and the mean inflection point results in pinning the psychometric function for all sentences at the mean, effectively normalizing the sentence level intelligibility. In this plot, the different colors of the curves indicate how the mean psychometric function can vary depending on how many scoring units are used and which scoring rules are applied. And on this slide, I'm showing two side-by-side psychometric plots, and I'll briefly walk you through them. The left plot is a replica of what I showed 2 slides earlier. And just as before, the x-axis shows SNR and the y-axis shows performance. And on the bottom, we see the distribution of the inflection point and slope across sentences. This represents the audio-only condition. On the right, we see the same analysis, but now with the addition of the visual modality. Again, SNR is on the x-axis and performance on the y-axis. What's important here is that adding visual information results in a clear performance benefit, which is made visible by the shift in the psychometric functions toward lower SNRs. To make this comparison clearer, on this slide, we replot the same data from the previous slide, but now overlaid on top of each other. So on average, we see a leftward shift in the inflection point with the visual modality, indicating a clear audiovisual benefit. At the same time, the overall shape and slope of the mean functions remain relatively comparable. Together, these plots show how DAST supports direct comparison between audio-only and audiovisual speech and noise testing within the same psychometric framework. Sorry, in the bottom left plot, we show specifically the change in inflection point, or ST, for each individual sentence when the visual modality is added. So on average, you can see that sentences show a visual benefit of about 5 dB, but this varies widely from close to 0 dB for some sentences to around 10 dB for others. We also can see that the slope of the psychometric functions here in the plot on the bottom right changes with visual information, and this allows us to assess not just shifts in threshold, but also whether or to what extent visual information affects test sensitivity. So together, these plots show that audiovisual benefit is robust on average, but also highly sentence dependent, which may be important to consider for test design and interpretation. You'll hear more about this from Brian later in the webinar. Up until this point, I focused on the creation and characterization of the corpus, both linguistically and psychometrically. The reason this step is so important is that it enables the next stage, and that's creating usable sentence lists for sentence and noise testing. Here, each list is designed to be equivalent, allowing them to be used interchangeably in repeated measurements or comparative studies. Having a large number of lists supports more extensive testing while reducing learning and training effects. So, Typically, this is a two-step process. First, you go through an optimization phase where sentences are grouped into lists that are matched in difficulty based on the available data. Second, you run a validation phase to confirm whether the resulting lists are actually equivalent when tested with listeners. The analyses I have shown thus far through the presentation provide the information needed to do this in a principled and data-driven way. So in the next slides, I'll show you how we use these data to construct balanced sentence lists. We first decided to focus specifically on audio-only speech and noise testing using female one's voice. We then filtered the sentences, removing those that did not meet our criteria, whether due to linguistic naturalness, discomfort, recording quality, or atypical psychometric behavior. From the remaining pool, we then carried out an optimization process, grouping sentences into lists that were matched in overall difficulty based on their estimated thresholds. This resulted in 44 audio-only sentence lists referred to as the F1A lists. On the right, I show a table containing information about the first list of the group. And here you can see the sentence number, the template type that was used, the appropriate RMS level offset for each sentence, and the sentence itself in Danish and English. Importantly, this process is fully transparent, so the exact list assignments as well as the sentence-specific normalization offsets that should be applied are provided in a CSV file that is available for download with the corpus. This allows us to reproduce the list, inspect the optimization, or adapt the materials for other applications. Here in this slide, we show the main results from the validation study of these F1A lists, and I'll briefly walk through the figure. Here, the mean SRT plus depictions of the variability is plotted as a function of the list number where we've sorted them in an increasing order. The key point here is that the mean SRT across lists was about minus 5.3 dB SNR, with the list means for all 44 lists falling within 0.5 dB of this grand average. This is exactly what we aim for in a validation stage, evidence that the optimization worked and that the lists are effectively equivalent. So we followed the same general filtering and optimization framework for the audio-visual material that we did for the audio-only F1A lists, but with an important additional constraint. Here, we also take into account the visual quality and filter out sentences with unsatisfactory video recording. We then use the audio-visual psychometric characterization as well as the audio-only psychometric characterization to optimize the remaining sentences into balanced lists. Because of these additional visual constraints, we end up with fewer usable sentences overall. So this set of lists is containing 32 instead of the original 44. The outcome, though, is a dedicated set of lists that are specifically optimized to allow for testing in both audio and audio-visual modalities, while still maintaining the same principles for list equivalence and controlled difficulty. We applied the same characterization-driven framework once more to develop another set of lists called the quick DAST lists, this time with a strong focus on clinical feasibility. So using the existing sentence and psychometric characterizations plus phonemic transcriptions, we selected and optimized shorter sentence lists that still provide robust estimates of speech and noise performance, but with substantially reduced test time. So QuickDAST is designed to fit more easily into routine clinical workflows, screening contexts, or studies where speech and noise performance is one of several outcome measures. Importantly, although the lists are shorter, they are still data-driven and psychometrically validated, allowing clinicians and researchers to balance efficiency and reliability, rather than having to choose one over the other. So just to briefly round things out, what I've shown today is how we've built a large, well-characterized corpus and how we use that to create multiple purpose-specific tests from audio-only and audio-visual lists to more time-efficient clinical variants. The key idea is that these materials are data-driven, transparent, and flexible, making them suitable for a wide range of research and applied use cases. With that as background, I will now highlight what's coming next in the webinar, where we'll look at how these materials are being extended and used in practice. So first we'll hear, Pernilla will first take a closer look at the dialogue material, which I mentioned earlier, and talk about how these more conversational recordings open up new possibilities. After that, we'll move into presentations from our user panel, where you'll hear more perspectives on applications and extensions of DAST. Anja will share an industry view from WS Audiology. Lars joins us then from Eriksholm, and Brian, who was formerly a PhD student here at DTU, will bring a more academic perspective. Together, this should give a nice overview of how DAST is being taken forward from corpus development into real-world use. So just before I hand things over, I want to briefly acknowledge the funding bodies and collaboration partners who made this work possible. DAST is really the result of contributions from many people across research, clinical audiology, and industry, and it has benefited greatly from close collaboration and shared input throughout its development. And with that, I will hand things over to Pernilla.
Thank you very much, Abigail. And before Pernilla will take over, there's just a question
sorry, I lied.
coming here from... Yeah, but Pernilla, you can start preparing. There's just a question come in here from Sam Watson, and everybody in the audience, please submit your questions in the Q&A if you have any. Who's asking, is the DAST app also available open source for further development, or only as a closed compiled app?
Very much open source and meant to be collaborative going forward.
Great. So I hope that was answer for Sam. And with that, I will leave the word to you, Pernilla.
Super.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Let me see if I can. Can someone confirm that you're seeing the audience view now?
It looks good.
Amazing. Thank you. So, yes, my name is Pernilla, and I'm here today to share how we use the dialogue material from the DAST project to create yet another speech material that we call the Everyday Conversational Danish Sentence Test, or ECO-DAST for short. And you might question whether it's really necessary to have yet another speech material, because as Abby said, we have several speech materials to use for speech and noise testing in Denmark, of course, including the DAST material. But what applies to all of these existing materials is that they have been carefully designed in terms of the speech and the language that they contain. And while there are, as you saw today, many good reasons to do it like that, essentially to maximize control over your test, it also makes the sentences sound in a quite specific way. So I'm playing an example now.
Jeg kan huske...
There's the poll. Let me try again.
Hvorfor vi strammede op på systemet.
I hope you could hear that. But then imagine that this person was just tested, leaves the building and walks into their everyday lives. And here they will encounter something that is quite different.
Der har jeg boet i den samme lejlighed.
So conversational speech is generally less structured, it's faster, and we co-articulate a lot in Danish. And additionally, the current speech materials that we have don't reflect the adaptations that we as humans make when conversing in background noise. This is typically described as Lombard speech or the Lombard effect. But in this study, we instead call it vocal effort. So if you're just talking to another person in quiet, you'll use your normal vocal effort.
Jeg kan faktisk godt lide at lave mad.
But if there's background noise, you'll have to increase your vocal effort to make yourself more intelligible.
Jeg tror, det er svært for mig at sige en bestemt ret.
And with this mismatch between the test situation and the everyday life situation, there is a risk that our test results are not as representative of the real life challenges that people have with listening to speech in the real world. And that's, of course, frustrating both to the patients or the participants, but also to us, because I assume we're essentially all here to help them. And we're not the first ones to identify this challenge. Already a handful of years ago, Kelly Miles and her colleagues in Sydney developed the everyday conversational sentences in noise test. And this is a speech and noise test where the sentences were extracted directly from recordings of spontaneous dialogues. And these dialogues were recorded with different levels of background noise in order to elicit different vocal efforts. And the idea here is that from the corpus or the speech material, you would be able to pick a sentence that is spoken in a way that matches the SNR that you're testing at. And this is something that we're currently not able to do. And in follow-up studies, comparing the intelligibility of these more conversational ecosyn sentences to more, let's say, traditional speech materials, the conversational sentences have been shown to be more difficult, both for hearing aid users and cochlear implant users. So this might indicate that the ecosyn or the conversational sentences provide results that are more representative of real life listening challenges. And we thought that this was very promising, so we decided to develop a Danish equivalent to the ecosyn. We called it the DAST. And we wanted to go through each of these development steps that Abby also highlighted in a way that allowed us to compare the psychometric properties of the DAST material to the DAST material. So the first step in this development process was to create a set of sentences or a corpus that we could base the test on. And Abby already introduced this briefly. So we had this audiovisual recording setup where we, for which we invited 3 of the 4 original DAST talkers back approximately a year later and asked them to engage in spontaneous conversations in pairs. And to elicit differences in vocal effort, we recorded half of the dialogues in quiet and the other half in noise, where the noise was presented via hearing aids. And then for the further development stages, we decided to focus on the dialogues which in female 1 participated, because she's the chosen talker for the validated version of the DAST test. So from these recordings, we extracted individual sentences and post-processed them the same way that it was done for DAST. The details are not important here. I just want you to know that we did the same thing. And then we went on to this extensive quality assessment phase where we rated the quality of each individual sentence on 8 different parameters. And those ratings aided us in deciding which sentences to bring into the next stage in the development. And then I thought it might be nice for you to listen to some of these DAST sentences. And I also brought some DAST sentences for comparison so that you'll be able to hopefully hear some differences. So here we go.
Sådan som jeg ved, at alle kan lide.
Vi mener bestemt, at de igen har skærpet tonen.
Jeg har ikke ret meget tålmodighed i forhold til almindelig madlavning.
Hun var berømt, fordi hun samarbejdede med præsidenten.
Men det er ret sjovt.
Han undrede sig over deres fantasi og deres mod.
So what I hope that you can hear here is that the DAST sentences vary a lot more, both within and across the sentences compared to the DAST sentences that are a lot more stable. So now we have a corpus of sentences, and the next step to develop the test was to collect data on the intelligibility of each of the DAST sentences. And for this, we recruited 40 young normal hearing individuals to test word recognition scores with us at 5 different signal to noise ratios. And from these results, we ended up with a final set of sentences, 400 sentences, ranging in lengths of 3 to 13 words. And this is quite some variation for a speech material in terms of sentence length, but we decided that it was that we would just let the speech material essentially guide the length of the sentences that we had. So there is no, it's not designed the same way that DAST was. So we just had to rely on the dialogue material that we had. And this variation is similar to what they have in the Australian EcoSyn material. And from these 400 sentences, we created 10 balanced lists of 20 sentences per vocal effort, so 20 lists in total. And we also fitted psychometric functions like the ones that Abby showed you. So similar plot here where we show the percentage of words repeated correctly as a function of the SNR. And all these very thin transparent lines are the individual psychometric functions for all of the sentences. And then the thick black line is what we call the overall psychometric function that was fitted to all of the word recognition scores for all of the sentences. So this essentially describes the material overall. And here we see an inflection point of the psychometric function, or the SRT, of minus 5.3 dB SNR and a slope of approximately 12 percentage points per dB. And in case you don't remember how this looked for DAST, I'm showing you that here. So when we're doing the same thing, plotting or fitting the overall psychometric function to all 1200 DAST sentences, then we see a very similar overall psychometric function. So yes, we see more or less the exact same SRT across the Eco, DAST, and DAST materials. But this might not be the same case for individuals with hearing impairment. At least from the Australian data or the EcoSyn material, we see that the more conversational sentences were more challenging than the more traditional clear speech sentences for individuals with hearing impairment. And it's important for me to highlight that EcoDAST is not meant to replace DAST or any of the other more traditional materials, but we believe that there are in some situations, that EcoDAST might be a good choice. For example, if you're striving for realism in your test setup, so both the speech material alone here is more realistic, and also if you want to test speech and noise in, for example, a virtual acoustic scene using a lot of loudspeakers. This is something that Anja would also talk a little bit about in her part of the webinar. But then we believe that these EcoDAST sentences would more easily embed in such a virtual scene compared to the more traditional clear speech sentences that we, for example, had in DAST. We, as I said, have 20 lists in the EcoDAST material, so that would have to be sufficient for what you have in mind. And also testing at a fixed SNR should also be an option, because adaptive testing is not so straightforward with this material, because a change in vocal effort should follow any change in SNR. So if you're changing the SNR all the time, then you won't have this nice match between vocal effort and SNRs, is essentially the idea. And then DAST also has the advantage of being fully validated and more traditional, meaning that it would be easier for you to compare your results with other materials than perhaps at least it would for EcoDAST. So to summarize, we developed EcoDAST to enable for more realistic speech and noise assessments. The final corpus consists of 400 sentences that were extracted directly from recordings of spontaneous dialogues. It demonstrated similar psychometric properties to what we see for DAST, at least for normal hearing individuals. So it has the potential to better reflect the everyday listening challenges that people have, but more work is needed on this. So I'd like to thank you for listening, and thanks to everyone who contributed to this project. The test materials are openly available on data.dtu DK. And here there's also a link to the paper describing the development and evaluation of EcoDAST that was just published Monday this week, actually, so brand new. Thank you. Thank you very much, Pernilla, for your great presentation. There's a question come in here, but maybe you just answered it, but I would just like to ask it just in case. Mette van Amerongen is asking if it's possible to send this to participants after the webinar, for the references, since the copy-paste function is not possible. Other means to save these are also welcome. Yes, I think the idea is that we send out a list of all the references and links, so you can find all the materials that we're citing here. Yes.
Perfect. And you can. Did you unshare your screen? I'm not sure. Yes, good. Then I will just do like this. Yes, and yes, and leave the word to Anja. I believe it's you next.
Yes, I'm sharing my screen.
And please keep your questions coming out there in the audience, and we'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a research audiologist at WS Audiology, which is the manufacturer of Widex insignia hearing aids. We are located at 3 sites in Erlangen, Singapore, and Lynge, north of Copenhagen. I am in the Applied Audiological Research Department, where we run studies with hearing aid users who volunteer to participate in audiological studies. We test hearing aid sound quality aspects in the lab and also in real-life environments, and we test the effect of hearing aids with speech and noise tests in the lab. We use speech and noise testing during hearing aid development, for example, when developing a new feature. A speech and noise test helps set the direction for feature development, for example, when comparing speech test results for 2 suggested noise reduction feature settings. And also, as a final quality check before product release, we can benchmark speech test results with our previous top model or with competitors. And there it is. Most often we use adaptive speech in noise test, where we look at the final speech reception threshold. That means the signal to noise ratio where the 50% of test sentences are understood. For example, here we compare 2 interventions in the visit where the participants were fitted with hearing aids and at a follow-up visit after 2 weeks. The more negative signal to noise ratio, the better, and we look for significant differences between interventions. What we have had for many years are labs with living room acoustics and an 8 loudspeaker setup. We aim to simulate real-world environments in our labs, like family dinners or parties that challenges participation in conversations. For this, we use the recorded monologues and dialogues from the DAST material and also the DAST test. With the DAST test, we are currently setting it up in our spatial audio lab with virtual acoustics. It consists of a 45-channel loudspeaker array, and we play real-world scenarios using higher order ambisonics. We have access to the RT database recorded by NAL in Australia. It contains 13 realistic typical environments like office, cafe, dinner party, train station. And we have a license to the FORCE database containing over 140 seats, which is the result of an industry collaboration between major Danish hearing aid and audio companies and international partners. Part of this database is public. One of these scenarios is recorded with an eigenmic in our canteen at WSA. You can listen to an example here. I hope this gave you an idea of practical use of the DAST speech material and speech and noise test. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anja, for this brief presentation. And next up is Lars Bramsløw from Eriksholm Research Center. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Just a moment. And I will bring this up. Hopefully in full screen. Let me see.
Yes.
Now you see it?
We just need the, yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to give you an idea of how we have applied DAST at Eriksholm Research Center so far. Just to be very clear about what is Eriksholm. Eriksholm is a part of Oticon and thereby also part of the Demand company. We do long-term research that's meant to be 5 to 10 years ahead of product features. and then we feed some findings into R&D at headquarters. And demand is, of course, consisting of three branches: hearing care, hearing aids, and diagnostics. And Eriksholm supports all of this, but mainly the Oticon brand. We are sitting somewhere between academia and industry, so we're part of the Oticon organization, of course, but we also interact with academia, and we publish large parts of our research, as also the example you will see here. We interact, of course, with test participants who come and do many listening tests here for our research, and we also interact with hearing care professionals. Speech intelligibility and noise is the main user complaint, and therefore we are also spending quite some efforts trying to improve this through algorithms and hearing aid features. We have some special research needs compared to what you heard Anja say, which was a more applied testing of final products. When we need to test new ideas and concepts, we want flexibility. So we don't necessarily test in the standardized way. We want to be able to change the test corpus and the test software according to specific research questions and specific test designs. So we need to be able to customize both the software and the speech material. And I want to give you an example here where we used DAST for testing prototype algorithms. So we needed to test multiple algorithms that were essentially replacing the functionality of the hearing aid. That means they were built into the DAST app, if you will. So we used the DAST corpus. In this particular case, we used DAST we used keyword scoring, which you can see by the highlighted words in the scoring field. We tested at fixed SNR, and we did this by modifying the standard DAST app to use pre-processed files, and also we made an automated test protocol such that the test would run in the proper balance sequence, etc. So you can imagine that here you have a large collection of files on a server corresponding to different SNRs, corresponding to different test participants, corresponding, of course, to the DAST sentence corpus. And the app could be modified for this. This was quite easy using the one that's available on GitHub that was also already mentioned by Abby. We could modify this to our needs. That was quite easy. So that worked well. Another application of the DAST corpus as such is AI applications and different. I'm thinking of speech enhancement and also noise reduction. So AI algorithms, they need speech material for training, and they need lots of it. So typically what's being used have been large public speech corpora with many speakers and with lots of, say, newspaper readings or what have you. The DAST corpus is special in the way that it has 2 males and 2 female talkers, and it has that both for sentences, monologues, and audiobooks. And what you would typically do with your AI algorithm is you would train the algorithm on the continuous material by specific talkers. So you would use the monologues or the audiobook readings for the training, and then you would use the sentences in the test such that you test on speech material that has not been used in training. That's very important in all AI applications. So this gives us the opportunity to test contrasts such as known versus unknown talkers and male versus female talker properties. And that's very unique for the material here. And we had a project some years ago where we did known voices separation, so you can imagine enhancing a particular family member from other voices in the surroundings, and this is the kind of situation where you have known versus unknown talkers, and DAST is quite useful for that. So with this image, I will finish my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars. And we are just about to wrap up the presentation round here with you, Brian. So please take it away. And I believe you need to unmute your microphone.
Yes, hello. Yes, are you able to see my slides from here?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm very happy to be invited here to talk and share my experience as a user of DAST in my experience, and hopefully from a lot of what the audience you've been hearing, what message that you've gotten is that the DAST is a very flexible and a very good material that can be adapted to many applications, including clinical, industry, research, development, etc. And now I'm here to just share a bit more from an academic perspective on how the DAST was able to contribute to some of the research that I had during my studies as well. So for me, I was investigating the audiovisual stage from the perspective of cognition, specifically listening efforts. And I wanted to start with the statement that is hopefully not too controversial, and it's that we experience our world in a multisensory manner, where if you're having a conversation with a person, that you're most likely to be having face-to-face, and that it's in fact over half of the conversations that we have in our daily lives. And so that's why an important factor to consider, if you ever heard of the cocktail party effect. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it at this point, but one of the points that Kjær actually mentioned in his paper is that the inclusion of visual cues is also a critical element to this sort of auditory scene analyses. And that's precisely something that has driven the inspiration for my topic in audiovisual research. And you can see, according to this graph over here, that it is not just me that thinks about the visual aspect of speech more recently. You can see that the figure shows that the researchers have increasingly recognized the importance of speech communication as a multisensory experience. And in order to better understand the experience of individuals in these scenarios, for example, people with hearing loss, it is important to also expand sort of the auditory speech into also the audiovisual domain, such that it could also improve on the ecological validity of our findings as well. And so you can also see here that there is an increasing number of publications that include some level of audiovisual speech or multisensory speech. And so for my project, sorry, there's this animations here, but I just wanted to go a very quick fly through on sort of how I wanted to structure my project. Is that essentially, if you've heard of anything related to listening effort, but essentially I'm expanding my research area into the audiovisual elements of listening efforts, i.e., if you start it from the left here, you could see that speech is actually a multisensory signal that goes into the brain and ultimately influences the cognitive demands of the task. That interacts with motivation, and finally that forms a sort of inverted U-shaped curve, as you can see in this solid black line here, which indicates how listening effort changes as a result of the interaction between task demands and motivation. So in very short, if a task were very easy, you would apply very little effort, but you would increase the effort as it becomes difficult. But when it becomes impossibly difficult, you would start to give up and effort would finally decrease. And that shows how people actually interact and allocate effort when the speech task changes in difficulty. And so my research goal was to investigate the effects of visual cues in cognitive effort during speech perception among normal hearing and hearing impaired listeners. As you know, hearing impaired listeners are more increasingly reliant on visual cues, as they have to lip read to compensate. However, I run into the exact same problem at the start of my project that a lot of the multisensory researchers have run into, and that there is actually no available audiovisual sentence material in Danish, but that is also very common in other languages as well. And historically, researchers have had to recreate their own stimuli with no control for psychometric characteristics. So for example, when Abby was talking about controlling for the audio, looking at the suitability for auditory testing or audiovisual testing, they simply do not have that level of access to information. And that leads us to the third point, where confounding factors may also exist, including factors such as phonetical differences, video quality, sound quality, pronunciation. And these factors are largely unaccounted for in these ad hoc created material if you don't consider these controls. So from our perspective, we decided to work with the audiovisual DAST material, and this was for the following reasons. First of all, it was convenient because it existed and such that we don't have to re-record our own material. There was also available information on the qualitative and quantitative characteristics, including the sound quality and video quality, but also the SRT50 slopes and offsets, which allow us to adapt our tests according to the statistics of the audiovisual DAST. There is good control of visual stimuli, positioning, neutral expression that is important for cognitive testing. And largely, and very importantly, there is a very large number of sentence material because if you were to conduct lots of these neurophysiological studies, they tend to have hundreds of trials, and that's something that only the DAST material is able to supply. And so here you can see one of the examples of the test setup that we have with people fitted with the cap with EEG and measuring pupillometry, and that's the material that we have. So I'm just going to quickly share some very quick findings of the project and some of the things that I used the DAST material for. And in the context of pupillometry, we were able to find that these inverted U-shaped pattern, i.e. how listening effort varies, was captured using pupillometry among normal hearing and hearing impaired. But if you look at the right, you can also see that this actually shows how people with hearing loss are reliant on visual cues, and that is the restoration of this release from effort due to visual cues under audiovisual speech. I won't go too much into details, but of course there's a link to the article below if you would like to read more about it as well. But just to say that these are some things that we were actually able to achieve using the audiovisual DAST material. Of course, our findings were not just limited to pupillometry. We also have behavioral results, but also some EEG results in which DAST material was also able to support, which also reflected in our models of audiovisual listening efforts as well. And so that ends my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your presentation. Now all the links that Abby has sent in the chat and all the references that has been asked about will be sent out in a follow-up email after this webinar, where the recording of this webinar also will be shared. So keep an eye on your inbox after the webinar, because it's going to be a few days probably. So I would like to just ask you, maybe if you can give us some insights to what's next for the Danish sentence test. Are you looking for specific new collaborators and specific new users? I ran a poll in the webinar here where about 37% said that they could see a use of the Danish sentence test. So yeah. Maybe Abigail, you would be the best to answer. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak on my own behalf. My focus is primarily on this clinical application, developing and validating the quick test version. This is primarily based out of a need expressed from my colleagues at the hospital, where the new guidelines in hearing aid fittings recommends that they do speech and noise testing for validation of hearing aid fittings. So my personal focus is on getting this up and running and as useful and easily implementable as possible for clinicians. But perhaps the others can add where their focus is.
Well, I can say, looking ahead, I think we will use DAST more than we will use the existing tests, for a quite simple reason, because the existing tests have about 10 lists available. And the problem is that people memorize those sentences, so you have to use a new list for every condition you want to test. And with 10 conditions, you actually quickly run out of options in your test design. So just the sheer number of lists is really important.
Yes, and I can also speak from my end, speaking because currently I'm positioned within the industry, is that also there are colleagues in research and development where we use lots of sentence material to validate the effectiveness of devices, are also currently being planned to use with the DAST material as well. So there is certainly a lot of industrial use cases in that sense as well.
And I can say from our point of view, you've already been using speech and noise test a lot. Previously, the hint test, which is limited to only 10 lists and with a sentence space going. So I think we will already be swapping to the DAST test. And also with our spatial audiological lab, and so we aim for realism and ecological testing. So we're very excited to try out the new EcoDAST. So I think that's our immediate future plans.
Sounds great. Pernilla, do you have anything to add before I jump to the next question?
Well, for me, it's mostly related to the EcoDAST, but my PhD project is focused on looking into the potential of using more ecologically valid testing, including EcoDAST, specifically for patients who have single-sided deafness, so completely normal hearing in one ear and deaf in the other, and the benefits of treating this type of hearing loss with a cochlear implant. Because specifically for this group, we believe that using more realistic testing might give us results that better reflect the benefits that people experience in their everyday lives. So that's the idea.
Sounds great. So,
but can I just add something really quick?
Sure.
Because none of us spoke to like future partnership collaborations and so forth. So I mean, I think all of us, we're quite collaborative, and all of us sitting here have worked together through the last years, and it's been very fruitful. But we're very open to new users, and I encourage any and all of you to get in touch. I think I'm very open and do my best to help folks who try to use the material and the software. So if and when you do that and you run into problems, don't hesitate to get in touch. And to Sam's point in the beginning, the software, I am not a software developer. None of us are software developers. So we've made something that we've found useful ourselves, but it comes with all kinds of caveats. But it is really, my hope is that others will start to use it, find and fix bugs, make pull requests on GitHub, and that it helps all users combined. So in that regard, we're super keen to collaborate going forward.
Sounds great. So I have a couple of questions here. The first one from Ash Kirby, who's asking, could the design of DAST be used for testing hearing with non-speech material?
Maybe I need clarification, but I think if you mean like, could you just show the visual material without the acoustic material? Is that the question?
Yeah, maybe we should ask to elaborate on this question and then move on to the next one.
The answer to that question, if that's what he meant, is yes, you could adapt the software to do that if you desire. And maybe Brian had this condition in some of his work. I'm not sure, but
yes, I did. I used it to assess lip reading ability as well. So yes, you could absolutely. The files are separated, but they're also available to be time aligned. So there are scripts that allow you to combine those and to play them in sync.
Great. Thank you, Ask, for your question. We'll move on to Helen Connor Sørensen, who's asking, any plans for the DAST tests to be implemented into commercial clinical software like NOAA, audit data, interacoustics, or otometrics?
Good question. None that I'm aware of. But it's something I'm very open to. In the context of how I spoke to having an interest in making speech and noise testing in Danish clinics easier, this would be fantastic. If there are folks interested in making this happen, I'm very open to it.
Great. And finally, a question from Leif Jensen, who's asking, was the survey on naturalness of the sentences conducted in a way that the participants could hear the sentences or just in written form? Would you expect that to make a difference?
So the naturalness plot data I showed and we gave in the data set is very much based on the written material. So the online survey did not include auditory or acoustic samples. But the quality evaluation thereafter was based on the recorded material. So there, particularly in the category of pronunciation, we focused on the naturalness of the recorded material. So I guess the answer is yes and no, in a way. I hope that's clear.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope so. I guess that's about it for today's webinar. I don't have any questions open, and you have covered everybody your work. So I would just like to say thank you once again to you all for joining us today in the webinar, both the panelists and you in the audience. I will just leave you with a couple of words from my side here. I'm sure that everybody in the panel are open to be contacted after the webinar, so reach out to them on social channels or wherever you can find them. And I would like to also notice you all about our upcoming webinar about Oracast in Frankfurt Airport, where the Bluetooth technology has been implemented at one of the biggest airports in Europe. So that should be quite exciting. It's going to be a short one, but a case study with Thomas Olsgaard from GN. And we also have our acoustic design for multi-purpose sports arenas coming up, which is probably more an acoustic and audio webinar, but definitely also interesting if you're into speech intelligibility and stuff like that. And Danish Sound Cluster also have our General Assembly coming up, where every member is welcome to attend and welcome new board members and get insights to what's happening at Danish Sound Cluster. So please keep an eye on that. And if you have any interest in other events, you can go to our website. And we're also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube, like I mentioned, where this webinar will be uploaded. And I guess that's all for today's webinar, and I hope to see you all one more time, and take care, everybody.